This is Group 2's presentation on content area literacy in science. We're going to begin by talking about some of the literacy demands in science and some of the ways that literacy coaches can support teachers in meeting those demands. Within the next generation science standards, there is a dimension called science and engineering practices. And these 8 key practices relate to students being able to develop and plan an investigation, read and interpret data from that investigation, and also synthesize their data into a coherent explanation that students must be able to then defend, evaluate, and communicate. We also have Common Core literacy standards of science and technical subjects. There's a full list of these standards in our references, but essentially some other expectations are that students can represent models and explanations visually and in writing, assess and compare contrast different findings, but there's also a strong emphasis on speaking and listening in the science classroom. And here, students are expected to speak and listen as they present their ideas, but they must also be strong, active listeners and be ready to possibly alter or adjust their own conclusions based on the scientific findings of others. And this was actually addressed in the Stanford University article that we're going to talk more about later when we discuss ways to support ELL students. But in this article, it was discussed that there's an importance in establishing a scientific discourse in classrooms where students are able to practice these types of speaking and listening skills. So to address these demands, one of the most important things teachers can do is establish an inquiry-based science classroom. And the National Research Council has established 5 essential features of that type of classroom. So here, students should be developing their science questions, writing and planning an investigation, recording predictions, discussing with one another how they will display and organize their data, as well as examining each other's data, noting similarities and differences, clarifying each other's thinking, and then ultimately developing and defending their final explanation. So by being actively involved in this inquiry-based classroom and not just watching it or hearing about the investigations, students are learning to read, write, think, and speak like a scientist. So some ways to support teachers in meeting these demands. One of the most important things a literacy coach could do is to help a teacher establish an environment that encourages accountable talk. So by using sense-making activities and social interactions, teachers can help students to better communicate and justify their explanations. Within these group discussions, accountable talk is so important where students are using academic language and defending their claims with evidence. Also with accountable talk, literacy coaches can help teachers to use certain moves to help promote good discussions and to kind of keep the discussions focused. So some of these moves include linking student contributions within the discussion, verifying and clarifying the points that are being made, pressing for accuracy, building on prior knowledge, and pressing for reasoning and expanding on students' reasoning. So whether it's with a book or talking about a investigation, class discussions and group discussions are very important. There also are certain literacy strategies that support science literacy demands, and those include purpose setting, making predictions, and metacognitive practices. So when students are tackling certain science texts, those are some important strategies to implement in our instruction. But also, we in an article that we found called The Science and Literacy Framework, a 5-step model to helping teachers design integrated science lessons using trade books, it was discussed that you were able to link science and literacy processes. So, for example, if a science trade book is talking about scientific observations and what they are and how they work, it would be a good idea to use visualization to understand that text because observations in science and visualization when reading are related in that way. Similarly, predicting and hypothesizing. So when talking about making scientific hypothesis, you might use predictions to help students understand a text referring to that science process. It's also important to allow students to cognitively struggle with some of their prior misconceptions when reading science texts. But lastly, another way to support teachers in creating a strong inquiry-based science classroom is through certain apps. And if you go to our PowerPoint, these apps are actually linked, so you can go right to them, but they allow students to make their thinking public. And specifically with the concept mapping, students can brainstorm their ideas. Using the annotating apps, they can share their discussions and share their thinking. And then using screencasting, they can analyze images and videos of scientific data.